If I seem relaxed, it's because we've tried this a few times.
You've only been doing this for like 7 hours.
It's not
What time is
a big
it?
deal.
10:30? Oh, well, if any of you are here with us, thank you.
Which means you probably are joining after the
Yeah.
fact, so thank you for that. Um, so I think if it's working, we would see it, but I
Let's
guess
see if I go to your videos.
we're not taking any chances. If you are in fact joining us on it, thank you very much. But we're trying
That
to
was our
see if
last
this is actually
episode.
working before we get too excited about it.
Yeah.
Because this isn't the first time
Yes.
again.
Your videos. Try this again.
Go to the live
Oh,
button.
right. Yes. I am not used to the Creator Studio.
I am. It looks like it's doing just fine. So we're going to test audio real quick. It looks like it's doing just fine.
Sounds good on your end. Sounds good on your end.
Ooh.
Oh, sounds good on my
Well,
end.
then.
Except I'm maybe a little loud.
We're very excited for tonight's podcast. Are we recording on that, though?
This is unlisted. How do we change that?
Oh, that isn't. Yeah. I edit video down there. That's an important thing to know.
Let's see.
I mean, we're going to post this anyway, so it will be public.
Done.
But now it's
Save.
now it's public to everyone
Let's-
currently. But the recording is before. It's weird. It's like a video within a video.
Yeah.
Exciting.
Visibility is
Exciting
public.
for everyone to start.
Let's see now if I change back to my account.
If it is indeed
If I can watch it.
accessible. Well,
This is terribly exciting for everybody. I
being
know.
that people are already started, I'm going to get started with them. So tonight we're going to be talking about a few things, some questions for people, and people did ask. So we will be answering those. We'll be going over some latest D&D news, which isn't much right now. Our world building podcast, which is episode 11.
Great.
It's working.
You guys should have access to us. Wonderful.
Hooray! All right. So, without further ado, is that recording?
No, it's not. Which is good because I don't want to edit through all that crap.
No, I can't imagine you would. But I just want to make sure before we start
Let's see.
that goes.
Yeah. Yes.
Because that's the most important part.
Okay, now we're officially recording.
All right. Well,
Wow.
so thank you for joining us, those that are on the live. I already explained what we're doing, so we'll just get started on the podcast. So this is a sneak peek. We're just kind of doing this for now here. We might end up doing this on Patreon later. Obviously, this is kind of like the testing phase, so we're not going to be doing so much of that yet. But right now we're just doing it on YouTube Live, hence the reason why it's
Hooray.
here.
A lot of testing here.
Lots. But if you want to fine tune something, it's just what you got to do. All right. So today we're going to be talking about, in particular, mostly about the world that we've been creating. Like I said, we are going to kind of go over some things, but let's introduce the podcast like a normal podcast.
Yeah,
I
that's a
think
good
that's
idea.
probably a good idea rather than focus on that.
Welcome to the Natural One Podcast.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us. My name is Bard, and this is...
I'm Will.
Yeah, and we're going to be talking about a few things today, just like we normally do. It'd be weird if we got on a podcast and weren't talking. So
We could sit here in silence for 45 minutes or an hour.
let's do it. Ready? Go. I'm bored.
It's not very silent.
No. All right. Anyway, so thank you for joining us for episode 11. Today, just like every time, we're going to be talking about world building. It's kind of been our theme.
So far, yeah, that's
Since we
pretty
started.
much what
We
we've done.
are
yeah.
going to introduce more themes. Obviously, there's a lot more to talk about in Dungeons and Dragons and world building, but since that's kind of what our vein of interest is and creating, that's kind of what we're going to go over.
It's what we like. It's what people are asking us about. So that's what
So we're
we're
going
going
to keep doing it. Beat this horse till it's dead. No, wait. Anyway, so today, starting off, is there any news in the D&D
Oh well,
world?
I'm glad you asked, Dave.
I'm glad I asked too. Not much, to be honest.
There's past. We try to stay up to date with all you guys on all this stuff. So, Really, the latest is we've got some rumors of a new monster manual coming out. We might
May
have
or may
some,
not be true, but honestly,
yeah.
that would be great. I am one for always enjoying the monsters. When they release new books, I'm like going to the back, always looking,
Hmm.
what did you release? What did you release? It's always
Yeah.
nice to have new stat blocks for horrible monsters.
Yeah, or books that can potentially modify, alter, and change the game for the better.
Yeah, and something to throw at your players to make them not feel so brave. And so now, I guess really the next subject is what we're going to talk about, the questions that we did. I went on Instagram now, possibly weeks ago,
Yeah.
but
If you're listening, yeah.
Inception. But if you're live,
If you're
then
watching live with us tonight, then
recent.
yeah, it just happened.
But I asked a few questions and I got some answers, and the answers were in the form of questions, which we will now answer. Weird, I know.
Whoa.
It's crazy. But one of the questions that
Is
we
this real
got
life?
was from, is this real life? One of the questions we got was from Tyborg Zero. He said, or she, I honestly don't know. Good for you. My one big question is how to make a good encounter that world builds at the same time. I thought that was a great question
Yeah.
because the simple answer on my end, and this is what I thought of immediately. I was about to answer it, but I was like, wait, save it for the live, save it for the podcast. Basically, when I'm creating the world, I like to have a loose formation on episode 0, very loose, because obviously we're creating our characters, we're coming into this brand new, and if you have an idea of what you want to do, kind of like an ending, at least this is me, and then the rest of it I form with the first couple encounters to see how you guys play. And then from that point forward, I kind of see, well, what is someone's backstory? And I kind of shape my campaign or the focus of what the players are going to be doing off of each encounter. So, and what they're planning on doing anyway. So I think it's crucial. If you just kind of railroad it, you can do that. There's definitely some goods and bads about having a set structure of then they're going to go here and then they're going to do this and then they're going to that, because honestly they mostly likely are going to go the opposite direction in my experience.
Yeah.
So that's my answer.
I personally like to have the encounters be somehow. A lot of times you can use them as plot hooks. It's people get to be introduced to a new character or a new concept because they're either drawn into a fight or they're pushed away from it, depending on how you do it.
We've had a couple of those.
Yeah, it's a good way to introduce a plot hook. Which, I mean, is there a better way for world building than to ask your characters to go search out X, Y, or Z?
Yeah.
I mean,
well, no kidding. And like in that same vein, where we did kind of a more political kind of intrigue campaign in Taldori, it was interesting that we kind of, I don't know if it was necessarily that planned. It's just that we kind of played that way, and so you kind of had to adapt to whatever you were doing.
Yeah, I mean, you
had to
guys
change a lot.
avoided a lot of things that I was hoping you'd go into.
The curse of the Bane. It's always there for a DM to follow up on.
Yeah.
You have these ideas.
You guys would get like halfway into a dungeon and you'd be like, let's turn around. I'd be like, no.
Oh yeah, in the current campaign I'm running right now, you guys do that all the time. I'm like, certain characters especially will be like, you know what? I bet, you know what? Forget this.
Yeah.
We are leaving, and I'm like, oh.
Wait a second.
We are leaving, and I'm like, oh. Testing audio.
Yeah, just testing audio.
Yeah, and when you guys left, like, all these areas, it's great because it's kind of interesting for me to be like, oh. And as a DM, you have to have backups. I guess that's the number one thing to answer that question is build your encounters and build your world, but know not to go too much in depth on everything.
Yeah.
Have some key NPC lists next to you, have some rules next to you, and then know the world enough. And Neil Gaiman, one of my favorite authors, talks about this in his masterclass that I listened to multiple times. He talks about you need to know all the details. Not necessarily put them on the page, but you need to know them so that it comes fluidly when someone asks you a question, or when you ask that question, or a character in your book or in your setting, or your players asks a question, you be ready with something because you know the world.
Yeah, that's kind of Sanderson does the same thing, except he puts it in a book that's not written for anybody.
Yeah.
So he'll have
Wow.
like 100,000, sort of Bible to his universe, where it's not going to get. And one of the things that he brought up was like, oh yeah, I know that the planet they're on is 60% gravity, but I'm not going to tell anybody that in the story.
Yeah, well, and it changes the
'Cause
construct of everything.
It doesn't make sense from the character's perspective to know that either.
And no one likes an info dump.
Right. It can get really boring really fast.
All right. Next question we have. I feel like we answered that one pretty
Yeah.
well. Whether you think so or not, that we're done with that.
Yeah.
Next we have from the chilliest or the chillest chimp. I love that name. When did you start doing D&D and what got you into it? Well, D&D was wasn't the drug that I first took. It was definitely playing games when I was younger that I was upset with because decisions I couldn't make that felt real to me. And then I started reading those books when I was a kid of Choose Your Own Adventure, where you flip the page and stuff, and that kind of gave you some freedom in books.
Yeah.
They weren't like super well written, but it was an interesting concept that I loved.
Yeah.
And then for me, I used to watch people play D&D. I used to watch when YouTube started being a thing. I know this kind of dates us a little bit, but when YouTube started being a thing, I was like, oh, and D&D started to be put out there. Podcasts started coming out with D&D. I started consuming it. I just loved it. But then I started playing like 2016 or 17, and maybe even earlier. I don't remember, but it wasn't too long ago. We're not like veteran D&D players.
See, you guys started playing. Was I in Ogden when you guys were doing that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, you weren't in town, but yeah, it was an experience because I already knew how to play.
Yeah.
But I'd never DM'd before, and that's what I always wanted to do, and I love doing it because I perpetually have ideas up here, and it kind of became a thing where I just loved playing.
Yeah. I first started
long before me.
16, 17 years ago. How old are we now? Maybe more than that.
It was more.
18 to 19 years ago. Oh man, we're old.
Yeah. Still young at heart.
Yeah, right. Oh man. Oh.
Most of your audience is
18 or
like
19 years ago I started. I didn't get as into it as I would have liked, just because I didn't have anybody to kind of hold my hand and walk me through it. And YouTube wasn't really there. The tutorial space on the internet wasn't really there.
The internet had like 6 websites and none of them were
I
good.
had a player handbook and like I was rolling up characters, but like I did not get it at all. Anyways, I had a group that we played with, and none of us really knew what we were doing, but we had fun.
And and that's kind of the cool thing about D&D is that you don't really have to know what you're doing.
Yeah.
I mean, if you have a DM that's coherent to the ideas and structures and rules, you're fine.
As long as everybody's playing in the same mental space, so to speak.
If you're at the same table and you're throwing dice around, you're probably fine. Rules are relative to the DM. I mean, I change things all the time, and I allow certain things that I know.
The book says DM rules go. I mean, 100% of the time.
All right, and then last question we're going to answer. We're just going to do 3 probably each time. We don't know if that's true or not, but we might change it. I like to answer a few questions.
Yeah.
And then this last one fits perfectly, and it's weird that he said it. Wizthrift, which I've actually been on one of his YouTube videos. He interviewed me for D&D, which he's really awesome. If you don't know him, go check out his page, Wizthrift. Anyway, he said, should I allow all classes or subclasses in my world since some things don't fit in certain worlds?
Yeah.
Fits in perfect because that's what we're talking about today.
We were discussing it literally before we asked the questions.
We had
on Instagram.
had some ideas, and we're like, let's run with that.
Yeah.
And then he asked the question. I'm like, well, okay.
We must
be put some energy out there.
Tuned in, yeah.
To answer your question very bluntly, and a lot of people don't like this, is you should not allow everything.
It depends on the setting.
Yeah. If you allow, because narratively, if you choose in your head as a DM saying, I mean, obviously, you ask your players, you find out what they're interested in first. You have to know your audience.
Yeah.
Because if you suddenly are like, I want a hardcore murder mystery, and everyone
no magic.
with no magic, I want it to be very bare bones, and just like gritty, but your players are like dead set on being sorcerers,
Yeah.
it's going to be the most boring thing ever for them. So
Yeah.
when I say no, what I mean is you've got to know what they're doing. And
Yeah.
if everyone's already talked, we're
Yeah.
assuming we're past the point you know who these people are, what their interests are.
Yeah.
Aside.
Yeah.
Okay, let's say you get to your campaign.
You might be playing with a random group of people, but that's a whole different bag of ball bearings.
Yeah, that one is pretty loose, and it's pretty hard to get a read on it. But
Yeah.
eventually you do. Run one shots is my
Yeah.
suggestion. Run a couple one shots first.
And it's not a bad idea too, when you're designing a campaign, to ask what your players are interested in playing.
Yeah, even have a little.
There's a couple ways you can do it.
I've seen actual forums online that people say, "What are your favorite things in D&D? What are your least favorite things? What are your absolutely nots?"
Yeah.
And it's good because then D&D has released a bunch of books recently that talk about that to kind of be sensitive to certain players. We all have dealing with different things and traumas and whatever, but you have to know what your players are into.
Yeah.
So, but that being said, that aside, you've already done your homework. We're assuming you already know your people around the table. They're probably friends or family or whatever. Okay. To answer your question again,
Long-lost relatives.
no, I don't think that you have to allow everything. I don't.
No.
I think you are the DM. And I'm not saying that. Listen, you let them do what they want.
Yeah.
They destroy, and for lack of better words, they do horrible things to your campaign that you never.
They
thought
can break
would
your
happen.
game. They can break your game if you're the campaign that you're creating is not prepared for what they're creating.
And this isn't a popular opinion, and I agree to some aspects when they say yes, but to everything.
Yeah.
I don't agree with that as
Yeah.
much as I used to. I used to be like, yes, we should always say yes and then have a counter. I'm saying if you let people walk on you in general, not necessarily just in D&D, it can be pretty hard for you to establish what you want as well. It's your game as well.
I'm thinking of an example here, just off the top of my head. Imagine you're building a zombie apocalypse scenario, and your players want to build necromancers. Suddenly,
Sure.
there's no
Zombies
difficulty.
fighting zombies.
There's no difficulty. They just I'll control everybody on the battlefield. Whatever, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, there's game-breaking feats.
Yeah.
There's game-breaking rules, spells especially that can totally change things. So, say for instance you're running a campaign like what we're doing right now. I'm doing it's kind of a feudal Japan style, but in my own like fantasy D&D setting.
Yeah.
So it's very fun, but sometimes I can find it hard to control when someone's using like a lot of crazy spells, and I intended it in my mind and with the original players to be low fantasy, kind of, where there was some element of magic, but it wasn't as strong. But now we're higher level, and the players that have magic have huge spells that for me, it creates, and yes, is it a lack of creativity on my part? Is it a lack of knowledge of studying every single spell in the book and what possibilities? And
You can't know everything as a DM.
you can't.
Yeah.
And even someone who studies it as much as I do fervently, I don't know everything.
Yeah.
I know most things.
Well, you get how many new books a year, and you're supposed to have all of that 100%
and
memorized?
not to
No way.
mention if you allow unearthed arcana,
Yeah.
if you allow some homebrew aspects.
If you're allowing previous editions.
Yeah, and I think it can be fun if you know it.
Yeah.
But again, as a DM, honestly, which is what we're going to talk about more today in our podcast about our world that we're building,
Yeah.
we are not going to allow everything because
We want to limit classes.
the more
and
you limit
races.
and fine tune it to fit what you want, it makes more sense to the players in the end, whether they like it at first or
Yeah.
not. It's because like if I put you in a modern setting and magic didn't exist, D&D isn't really what you should be playing.
No.
Like you should be playing some other TTRPG. I mean, you can do D&D if your players are more
Yeah.
comfortable with it.
Yeah.
But then start to add different mechanics from other things that make it more feasible and makes sense with what you're doing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, so like with what we're building right now, we're thinking we're going to limit possibly races and classes. I think, for example, Drow probably won't fit into this world at all.
No, quite a bit of the Underdark classes, the more lofty things like Aasimar, Genasi. I mean, I think those should be like sages or like rare things.
right.
Like if you're going to have a really unique race besides human, elf, dwarf, or whatever, I'd say the core ones. I say that
Yeah.
loosely
Yeah.
because the core is pretty open at this point.
Right.
But you don't want someone to be. I butcher this every time. The Arakakra or whatever the
Yeah.
flying
Uh-huh.
bird people when everyone else is trying to struggle. Because here's what we're going to talk about. What if there's mazes? What if there's like
Yeah.
things that are hard to get through? And one of your characters can cast fly, go over the whole thing, and where is the conflict? Because they're like, go here, 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 here. Then
Yeah.
as a DM, you're like, well, to make this interesting now, because I didn't think about that spell that
Yeah.
they had in their pocket,
Yeah.
and it screws up the entire campaign for everyone else.
Right. Yeah.
Because sure, a monk can run up walls, a thief can run up walls.
Yeah.
There's so many mechanics that you have martially without magic that are good anyway, that are pretty game breaking sometimes. But when you add spells on top of that, where you can increase someone's jump distance like 6 times,
Yeah.
it starts to create a new thing. So I think with our world, it's going to be fantastically low magic with some high fantasy settings.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Maybe some items to allow for magical abilities.
Yeah.
Masks come to mind with
Yeah.
like Majora's Mask.
Well,
kind
and
of
if
a
you
thing.
so those of you that are kind of unfamiliar, especially those watching the live later, is that this is kind of a Legend of Zelda type world, not Legend of Zelda.
Yeah.
We
Yep.
rolled a couple d20s to figure out some settings and ideas and everything and what the characters are going to be, and then we are forcing ourselves to build a world and a campaign starter off of this. So in Zelda, when you're trying to achieve something, there's always something you have to acquire in that temple that is going to
Yeah.
help you later on, or quest, or
Yeah. You generally can't run to whatever temple you want.
yeah. And we like open world. We love
Yeah.
open world, but sometimes in this particular situation, we're gonna have like items and things that make sense to move on to the next area.
Well, and maybe they can still do a temple, but they would have done a lot better if they had changed the order that they did it in.
Yeah.
Or
I think
something to
of
that
one of my
effect.
favorite games growing up is Mega Man.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have played those games, I loved Mega Man X. That was my all-time like favorite Mega Man that came out. It was so unique, and
Yeah.
it had all these cool items that you'd gather up, and it had kind of a decent story. But what my favorite thing about Mega Man is that you'd get a gun, and you had your main blaster on
I'd
your
always
arm,
go after Trash
and
Man
it was just
first.
fine. But you you have to get. Sure, you can go to any of the bosses. And that's kind of the idea, is what we're talking about here, is there's targets that we have to go after in this campaign
Yeah.
to get an ending or whatever. Whether you kill them, save them, kill them all, kill
Yeah.
a few. There's different endings that we're going to have. But for this in particular, we kind of are going to have, if you defeat this guy or do this or go to this place first, it's going to help you with the next one. You can skip all that and go to the end and try to fight the bad guy if you
Right.
really want to, but he's probably going to destroy
There'll be
you.
a consequence. Yeah.
And also, you're not really in it to kill the bad guy.
Right.
You're kind of in it for your own selfish needs of getting crystal shards to make your city keep flying.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing. And so in your campaigns, when you're creating them, think about that. Think about what limitations you're fine with, cutting back on, and some things that you're like, I'm going to allow certain things in this area. For us, in this one, we're going to say pretty low magic, to the point where we almost might limit. If you're going to be a spellcaster, you might not want to. You might want to multi-class.
Yeah.
Do like cantrips and maybe level 1 spells, and then mostly like military type
Yeah.
stuff, like hitman stuff, like long range, close range rogues. There's
Fighters, barbarians, rogues,
monks. There's
Yeah.
there's so many options available. It kind of makes your characters do something that's
Yeah.
maybe different from what they usually do.
And the fantastical elements will be introduced through
Items.
the game,
Items and
through
weapons.
playing the
Yeah.
game. Yeah, not through I'm inherently powerful because I have these spells.
Or instead of killing one of the main bad guys, maybe because you spared them and were able to find a way to convince them to be on your side, they grant you or one of your people a power, or all of you some kind of ability.
That's what I was thinking.
And kind of unlock spells or unlock abilities
Yeah.
or feats
Mhm.
or something, because I've done that in our game where I let you guys choose a feat. I gave you guys a list, not all of them.
Yeah.
I gave you a short list, like 2 each that you could pick from.
Yeah.
That this amazing character was like, hey, I'm going to die soon. I want to give you something as a thank you. So maybe this can be something that they do
Right.
to give them abilities to kind of level out that fantastical nature of D&D, where it's like you're doing spells and you're doing things
Yeah.
that are a little bit above the average commoner.
And it'll help, not break the game, especially, where we're considering building puzzles in. We don't want to have a broken component going into those puzzles that's just going to totally ruin the fun for everybody.
Well, I think of like in Ocarina of Time in Zelda when you would go to like that forest area and there was that maze, and you could actually get on top and kind of jump around a little bit with a grappling hook, right?
Yeah.
Which it kind of makes it fun. But before you have it, you have to go through the maze
before you earn the item. Yeah.
It would make kind of a fun concept for a bunch of characters having to go through this, and I almost want to make. I'm now going to. I think it'd be fun to do an area with a maze that's very, fraught with traps and like a minotaur. Like make it like old school, like mazes, because it's fun. Because if you can just jump over a maze, make there a consequence for getting up high.
Right.
Find a way to make it interesting, like Maze Runner, where there's things that are just like you should not do that.
Yeah.
Because if you put rules. Limitations and rules sound stupid to people.
Yeah.
They hate limitations. They hate rules.
Yeah.
And I get that. But you can frame anything any way you want. It's just like, like selling the pen, in the Wolf of Wall Street situation. It's the same concept as that. You can change the way they perceive it as say, listen, this game is going to be cool if you allow it to have certain rules. And we all want to be that crazy DPS guy that destroys an entire field of enemies once in a while. But having flaws and problems and, issues and not having a full array of spells might help your characters develop as a person.
Yeah.
And have to use their wits instead of a bomb.
Right. Yeah, they get to use their wits to fight, and, you can have more balanced creatures and encounters, too, where you can have things designed specifically for what you built into the game, not everything that's out there, and just kind of hope that they don't throw something really weird at it.
Well, and what's interesting, the types of monsters you can start to use, the type of enemies you can start to use. Sure, seeing health point 22 zombie, I mean, it's not scary, but if it hits you, it infects you. But if you add the guy that can blast it from 600 miles away from something, it's like, it's not scary.
Eldritch Spear, yeah.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, you can do that kind of stuff with Magic, which is cool, and I love it, but I think it has its place. If you're playing a high fantasy setting where anything goes in D&D world, cool.
Yeah.
You set that experience up, they know what to expect, it's fun. We're talking the more minimalist type style, where it's like, you're cutting out some of the extra fat, you're playing with the core rules, you're kind of focusing on the development of the player and the character, and see how they kind of adapt to this situation by using tools and using things you find, rather than allowing their suddenly cosmic abilities that they can now do.
Right.
It's fun to some degree in certain campaigns, but in this one, I don't see that being very fun.
Yeah.
Because making someone go crazy and kill themselves isn't very exciting,
Yeah.
Well, okay, for certain
Depends.
degrees. So that kind of, I feel like, answers somewhat of that. But let's kind of think about what we would do with these characters in these kind of situations. What kind of gadgets do you think would be necessary? So we kind of made a map, kind of an idea of what we're doing, kind of fleshed it out a little bit more off camera, off podcast, to, make the world a little bit more a reasonable place. So we have... as a placeholder, we're kind of calling them sages, but that's not what they're going to be. But if you remember in like Zelda, a lot of times they'll have like these 7 sages, right?
Yeah.
So Zelda, or as we're calling her, Queen Liliane at the moment, possible change, but I don't know, we might keep it. We're just calling her the Queen for now. She is the 7th one, so she leaves after an attempt on her life, which everyone else in the kingdom believes she's dead.
Yeah.
Even maybe Corridon, this main bad guy that's now taken over, who's now currently king.
Yeah.
So she comes and finds your party. She explains the situation, says, I need to restore this kingdom, but the way I'm going to do that is either get these guys on my side or kill them. You know, something drastic, which is not what Zelda would do, but we're making this our own.
Right. This is not.
This isn't Zelda. This is
It's
pretty
not
gritty.
Yeah, yeah. This is our own.
Because you're Hitman, if you don't, if you recall. So the idea is you're contract killers, and so I imagine whether they can, actually kill them or change them to the side. It's
Yeah.
totally up to the players. I think most players will kill because that's pretty.
You could
common.
you could set it up that they are like trained hitmen, but that they are hired to stop, not necessarily kill, and they might interpret that as kill because they're called
Good
hitmen.
point. Good point. You use the word kill, and then it's like license to murder.
Right.
Everything.
It kind of takes the choice out of their hands a little bit, maybe, and kind of leads them towards
Which,
the.
if your players are kind of more on the evil side and they want a whole scorched earth
Yeah.
campaign, sure,
Let them do
this
it
can happen.
because it'll have a consequence.
I have consequences. I've
Yeah.
got 3 right now. I might do more. We're kind of have talked about it. I just put it down there. But
It would be pretty neat to give the death of each sage a consequence.
okay. I like that.
Maybe blight the land that they're in charge of in some way.
Or like the water source becomes
Yeah, just something happening.
less.
You know?
Or, like if it's a desert area, they have
Yeah.
to leave it or something.
Yeah.
And no one else wants them. You know what? I think it'd be cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. Well, good. And so in that,
Items. We were talking about items.
yeah, so in that, I imagine, so let's say, for instance, they were going to that desert area.
Hey, it's we got Bruce and Mark in.
Oh, no way. Hey,
Yeah.
nice to see you guys.
Hello.
It's nice to see you. It's been a bit.
Yeah. No kidding.
Yeah, but I think if we're starting in like Karin, for instance, this desert, plateaus, typical deserts where you've got these giant sand dunes, it's a significant part of the map. To get there, let's say you started in
The Cursed Wilds.
yeah, let's say you started in Melith and then you found a way down, which I imagine you'd take some kind of like, yeah, what, it's like Zelda, right? So they'd probably have some like flying creature, or possibly like
Yeah.
a big thing that they'd hang on to and like glide
glider.
down. Yeah, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's something fantastical that would be fun for the players.
Yeah, you could set it up where maybe there's points of rising air that they have to hit. As one of the puzzles to get through areas.
I think if you added some video game style elements to
Yeah.
this world, it would make this feel worthwhile.
It's
So the ones-
fantastical in its own way.
because some people, I feel like, rely too heavily on magic. It kind of becomes a crutch where you stop. It's much like one of my favorite movies my wife and I watch all the time. There's this scene where she's like, this woman gets introduced to the mother, and she's like, "Oh, you're not that pretty. Oh, good. So you were able to develop a personality." You know what I mean? And so,
Yeah.
like, it's the same type
Yeah.
of thing with magic. It's like when you rely so much on the magic users, it's so like,
Yeah.
what are they going to do? And it's the same type of situation if it's like a bard who comes into a city. Let's let him do the talking because he's charisma.
Right.
Where everyone else doesn't get to do stuff.
Yeah, everybody kind of sits back and watches.
But with a low fantasy setting where there's a magic, but it's not too crazy and it's very
a little bit more equalized.
it kind of balances out. And obviously you might have to balance out certain other aspects of other players if they're like 600 moves while everyone else gets one hit. I mean, I feel like if you
I
limited
mean, like if it's a stealth archer who plays monk jazz.
yeah, I don't know. That's a reference to somebody. But I don't know. I feel like if you went to like the desert, for instance, what kind of item would you need to go to a place like that you wouldn't have with
so you
create
could do,
water like a
You
cleric?
could do environment-based items. So if you wanted to do something that like resisted heat,
Maybe sandstorms,
Um,
stopping it with like some shelter, like Leomund's tiny hut. Like it's a spell,
Yeah.
but it's granted to them to use.
right?
But like, say for instance, like sandstorms are so common, no one goes to the waste. Getting sent to the waste in exile is like a death sentence.
Uh-huh.
So let's say if they go to this place, they have to meet with someone and do some task or side quests, and it's like they give them Leomund's tiny hut, like a spell.
Yeah, absolutely.
And but it's more of like an item, and so it's like they pull it from the back and it covers them, and then they have to hide from the like intermittent sandstorms that you couldn't predict otherwise.
Yeah.
I don't know, something like that.
yeah.
Does that make sense?
Uh-huh. You could do fast travel options.
I think that's actually a necessary thing for a world this big. Because in video games, it's a very common trope is that you just suddenly go
Yeah,
there.
because if you got to navigate back to the
So
same place,
so like teleportation circles in the major cities.
jazz for life.
Yeah, it made the campaign. Yeah, so let's say they're going to a snow place. What kind of like if they're going to Stormbarrow or Embermore or
Sure.
things like that?
Sure, yeah. So if you take Breath of the Wild into consideration, um, hot and cold are parts of those.
Yeah.
Sometimes you could, if you're in a hot area, you can equip an ice sword, and suddenly, the heat's not as big of an issue. Or, you have some sort of enchanted gem that you wear, like an earring or a hat or something.
And it'd be interesting because maybe they'd only have one of those things.
Yeah.
So the party would kind of have to trade off and
Or
deal
like split or like
deal with exhaustion points.
split exhaustion between the party.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it would kind of be interesting.
It would, yeah.
So if they're trying to get to somewhere that's hard to get to, that most people wouldn't be able to, some hidden temple in some icy cavern, and it's like, oh, I don't know, no one goes up there. Are you crazy? And it's
Yeah.
like, well, I know some old guy in a cave that has some magic item, and everyone's like, all right, sure, we'll try to do it. Maybe they meet some encounters. It's fun. I mean, it creates a lot of side quests to gather these items, and then that way I feel like it fleshes out the world instead of just being a bare
It gives it a
bones.
little bit of whimsy too.
I think so
and
too. That's why I'm loving
a
this
little
so
bit,
far.
little bit less serious, a little bit more whimsical. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a common thing that, and I've said this already, and I'll say it again, is just when you rely on magic users, all your needs are filled.
So, how would we deal with players in an extreme environment while keeping things more fun?
Is that the question?
Yeah.
I like that. How would we what? One more time.
How would we deal with the players in an extreme environment, but also make it fun? Less like,
Less arduous,
yeah,
like just
less
roll a
like
bunch
you're
of checks.
exhausted and you're dying, but more,
I think what
more
I like
fun,
to
like
do
extreme
is
heat or cold.
I add random encounters to help with the mix. I will put in random encounters doesn't just mean combat. For me, I always put like little things, especially when there's exhaustion areas. Like when you guys were in that swamp, yeah, sure, there was water aplenty, but it's still hot, and you're dealing with running out of resources faster. So for me, I always feel like to not make it tedious to the players, because that unless you guys are in it for the survival aspect of it, which most people aren't when they're playing D&D.
Yeah, usually not.
Because and the mechanics for that, they're
Some
not.
people do like survivalism. I mean, it's.
I feel like the
know your
mechanics
table.
for that are pretty harsh. Like when you
Yeah.
get an exhaustion level, you
Yeah.
almost become
It's hard.
much less useful. And
Suddenly, what is it? It's you have a disadvantage on all skill throws
well, yeah, and then
for your first point.
it gets worse
Yeah.
and worse until you die,
Yeah.
and that's fine, I
You
guess.
could do some really fun like combat encounters in the extreme temperature stuff.
True, and maybe they have items or things that they can use that you're like, oh, I'm so glad this guy had a water skin because
Yeah.
we were running out.
Yeah.
And yeah, it may not be enough for all of you, but it's enough to stop.
Maybe
some
if it's
things.
like let's say like an extreme heat scenario and they're in the desert, maybe they have to make between spaces of shade within a certain amount of time.
yeah.
Otherwise, they start to lose health or slow down or something.
Well, like you said, that adds to kind of the whimsical aspect of it. But I absolutely agree, and I think also when you're playing with players like this and you're having these extreme conditions, offer some alternatives. Like you're saying, like for instance, a lot of people don't do survival checks and they don't do dexterity checks or sleight of
Yeah.
hand checks while building things.
Yeah.
Maybe someone said, like in their history, they were a sailor, and so instead of using this cloth that they have as like a bedding, maybe they use it as like a sail to put onto like a weird boat that they craft.
Yeah.
I mean, like, and have it like a little sand thing that they're kind of controlling, like
Yeah.
I don't know.
Sand surfer.
Give people ideas, but don't give them all the ideas. You know what I mean? Let your players.
You could maybe find ways for them to like ride the native animals or something.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's like in Final Fantasy when you find chocobos. It's like this, like, yay! I can get through this area faster now. But yeah, finding indigenous wildlife to try to tame and use
That in itself would be a really fun side quest.
Of
and
course
then
it
and then
would.
they'd have a fast way to travel in that extreme environment.
And
Anyway.
also, it allows this, like, and I know this sounds evil, it allows this thing that you can take from them.
Yeah.
And, like, maybe some predator
Yeah.
herded a bunch of them off.
Which could act as motivation for one of the sages, or
It absolutely can. That's actually what I was going to
yeah.
say. Maybe a group of bandits while you guys are entering this, like maybe it's like this huge crack in this huge, like, sandstone wall, and that you know that this is the location of something, and you all sneak in there, and it's this little dungeon. You get out, and all your animals are gone, and there's like some, like, blood or something, so you know it wasn't just they ran off.
Yeah.
And so you're like, oh, we've bonded with these animals, and so it becomes this tracking mission where they
Yeah.
find them, and then they find a bandit camp, and that actually leads to, like, some person that you're mainly searching for, and you can find alternate information about how to stop them rather than just kill them.
Right.
You know, and it as a DM, it's so fun to use random side quests to actually fit the main quest.
Right.
And if you're clever enough, you can
Yeah.
actually have a lot of fun with that.
Yeah.
So absolutely,
That's generally what you have to do anyway.
I think it creates extreme conditions turning into fun
Yeah.
alternate ways to get around. Let's say, for instance, they try to go to Melith. It's up in the sky.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
like that's where you start in, but maybe you have to take out someone there that's hiding there, and he's like betrayed your people, or I don't know, whatever we end up doing.
Yeah.
It would be a fun thing to kind of like travel from floating island to floating island.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
what kind of mechanics you'd have to use. Very dangerous ones, so you'd have to be careful because you're
Yeah.
really high up, and if you're not using crazy magic spells like Featherfall, you're pretty much done.
Yeah.
Which kind of creates an aspect of terror in your people.
Right.
If there's a rope bridge that's swinging over these islands, like in Chrono Trigger, when you go into the future or past, I don't remember. Actually, I think it was the past, but it was more futuristic looking, so it seemed like. Anyway, but they have like bridges between these giant floating islands, and I always thought about how terrifying that would be.
Yeah.
I mean, like, what if the bridge gives out? So, I mean, difficult situations can be created to be fun rather
Yeah.
than tedious, is the point.
Right. Yeah.
Getting cold, it's like, well, if I was a DM, I'm like, oh yeah, you go up to the cold area and you start to notice you're getting cold, and it can be boring if you're not putting some real description in, where you're talking about how you feel your toes starting to, lose themselves, like they're just, you don't even know if they're there anymore. You
Right.
just feel like you're walking on stumps, and you start talking about the wind just cutting through your armor and your clothes and
Yeah.
just making you miserable, because we've all been cold, most of us, I would imagine.
Yeah, so one of the things you can do, and you sort of have to do in Breath of the Wild. I'm going to use a lot of Zelda references.
Well, that's what we're doing,
Hopefully you guys
so-
don't get sick of it. That's what we're drawing
Please.
from.
Because that's what we're trying to make a world.
You can eat spicy
around.
peppers in the cold environment to stay warm for a limited time.
Okay, so kind of a whimsical,
Yeah.
another thing that you're saying
Yeah.
is to find a way to make food to be a warmer. Maybe there's a magical component to like a drink you can make,
Right.
like fire water, like
Yeah.
like a alcoholic beverage that literally keeps you warm. That'd be fun, because
Yeah.
then maybe you have to go on a quest before you go up to the mountains,
Yeah.
but maybe you don't have enough.
Gotta get drunk first.
Yeah, so you have alternate like side things
Yeah.
that are going on with some characters not being able to hold their alcohol.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be interesting. I love that,
be
actually.
funny, yeah.
That would be fun. Trying to traverse some rocky terrain with monsters, and you're all a little bit tipsy.
Tipsy mountain climbing, that's my favorite.
It's super safe. I mean, all the major adventurers are doing it these days. That's a great question. I'm glad you asked. That was good.
Yeah,
Thank you.
That was a good one. Thanks, Mark. So there's also there's environmental based item requirements,
Sure.
but what about location based?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I mean, keys, obviously that's super.
Well, and that goes without saying. It's
Obvious.
such a common thing.
That's-
But think about like the boomerang, or the grappling hook, or the slingshot, or whatever.
Yeah.
There's all these things that are used to open doors, or it's very common and kind of boring at times. You're like, oh, okay, where's the eye in the room? I gotta shoot it. I mean, it's like the
Right.
same thing.
Same puzzles over and over.
So I
Yeah.
think adding puzzles that make you want to have certain items to make them easier. Maybe the dungeon makers in the past all were like the same architect guild of gnomes or dwarves or something that really were like, hey, this works pretty well, so let's just do it everywhere.
Yeah.
And so you're like, okay, we know how to do this one, but it's pretty tricky and it can be pretty deadly. Make the encounters with these traps like severely punishing. So you're going to want to have this item. And so whatever that item is, whatever we make.
I wonder how you could set that up without, TPK, like
Well,
how do you set up that expectation where like, okay, we really do want these items rather than we're just going to do whatever we want.
As I've always done before, I will use certain key terms. Like for instance, you're walking up to this wall trap and you've seen this like face on the wall before, and let's say that it like does the blade thing from like Indiana Jones where it just comes out in this huge saw. and let's say that like some character gets hit by it. I wouldn't do it where they're going to get hit fully by it, but they get hit a little by it.
Oh.
But it does enough damage, being like, if it did that much and I'm this far away, if I was there, I'd be toast. So kind of like allowing like, oh, I need a certain gem to stop this.
You set up the glancing blow on purpose.
On purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rather than allowing them to go fully into the trap and just die.
Yeah. I feel like it's necessary in certain times. Certain traps, it's fun to just totally sideswipe your characters, especially when they're getting cocky and being like, we can face it all, and they just like totally take out one person,
right.
And then they're like, okay, we need to heal this guy and then also watch out. That can be fun too. I feel like there's two sides to that coin. But
so we might have to
there's some workshops,
spend some time setting down and writing these out with the items anyways for like location based.
Yeah. There'll be several. We're not going to do, dozens or anything.
Yeah.
This is going to be a campaign starter that we're going to release, but this is how we would do it.
Yeah.
So if you're building your own world and if you're kind of creating your own homebrew situations of asking these kind of questions, obviously you are.
Yeah.
But
well, this could be a full 3-act story on its own, but
could be,
depending on how it's played, it'll open up a lot more too.
Well, and we're going to leave options open for the DMs because I don't like being railroaded on campaigns. We did that. We played Salt Marsh and certain characters were here that were in chat right now. And it was fun. I liked Salt Marsh. I really thought there was so much to it, and we didn't even touch I think we got like half of them.
Yeah.
The side stuff, and it was so cool.
Well, we went way off.
But you guys went way off script. But for me, reading those things, it felt very forced. I like a lot of homebrew stuff, and then when you're doing exactly what this person would say, what this person does, that they have written previously.
Yeah.
I feel like it's nice to have them so you can create your own stuff off of them. That's my personal. That's why I get all the books, is so I can look at what they've done.
Yeah.
So I can become better as a DM.
Right.
And see how they do it, and kind of take what I like of theirs and change it to my own.
Yeah.
But I feel like we're going to do the same. We're going to create a very, I think, a fleshed out starter campaign with some aspects of each area that might make it interesting. But ultimately, you're going to make up a lot of the scenery. You're going to make up a lot of the tiny locations, the camps, the beasts, the monsters, whatever you want to do with it. It's your world to have fun in. That's our goal.
Yeah.
That you have it, but it's easy for you to use. Yeah. It's accessible to all types of DMs, not just experts.
It's more of a sort of a middle ground kind of world that will help you in the future create more of your own worlds, rather than holding your hand and walking you through something that you'll never be able to graduate from. So,
and even it might not even work that way.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, like, I think of a trap that's like foolproof. No one's going to get this. And someone gets it immediately, and then there's all this stuff that I planned. Remember,
it's a mirror.
Remember the other night? Yeah.
Yeah.
I had this riddle. They were going to face shadow versions of themselves in some like liminal plane of existence, and there were going to be the exact opposites of them, and they were going to know their abilities. They were going to fight against them. I had all the spells. I was ready. And someone solved the riddle
before the fight even
began.
Yeah,
which was cool because I was like, "Way to go!" But also I was like, "All right, so now we're back on the boat." And
I had not caught that was a riddle. I wouldn't have gone there.
It was crazy.
Not that my character was there anyway, but yeah.
But the point is that don't hold people's hands because they're gonna change it anyway.
Yeah.
You can do that. But yeah. I don't know, is there really anything else in that aspect of the items? I think we've pretty much covered all that.
Yeah.
We do have all the sages named. We have some of the outcomes done. Sages is a key term that I'm using as a placeholder until we figure out what they're actually called. Targets. I mean, really, ultimately, is what they are
Yeah.
in one way or
For
another.
our hitmen, yeah.
And as far as the rest of the world goes, we've got the map completely made. We've got a lot of aspects of the history and lore done. We're not going to completely lore dump you. You can fill in the
Yeah.
spaces of your own. You can even change the names, but we're just kind of putting something there for you if you don't like to do that.
We'll put a race placeholder for the different cities because we did decide that they are going to be
pretty
essentially separated races by city.
Because that's how they do that.
That's how those games
Zelda.
played. Yeah.
There's always like a group of people, and yes, there'll be like outsiders from other areas visiting, traders.
They'll also be fun
like
to put in, like people in the roads and stuff.
Yeah.
Floating elves, shoot them down and buy a map.
Are you talking about Tingle, that weird guy?
Tingle, yeah.
Dude, that guy drives me nuts. Yeah, I mean, we'll try to add
things like that. That'd be funny to add.
I think we could have some like DLC type content that we'll like release with time of fun little NPCs,
extra little side stuff.
Well, you know, I always add a few NPCs anyway. Besides that, just kind of fun characters you can throw in each city. I normally do that, so we'll
little callbacks that are not necessarily like, oh wow,
copyright.
This is,
Yeah. We don't want to do a direct copy, which is not what we're doing. We're using it again.
World
Zelda.
events similar to The Legend of Zelda.
Yes, similar to.
Yeah,
so we're trying to stay true to that, so we can stay within our
Yeah.
parameters of
What we rolled.
trying to make off this roll that we did. Which at first I was like, I don't know how we're going to do this, but I think it's coming together pretty well.
Yeah.
But yeah, in the next podcast, if you guys have more questions, if you have any more things, please bring them up, because honestly, most of the time we're talking about this stuff anyway. But it helps us fine-tune it and direct it to what you are actually looking for, because ultimately we're here to have fun ourselves and help you at the same time.
Yeah, and being live was fun. You know, thanks Mark for giving us suggestions. You know, that kind of gave us a little thing to branch off into and think about. So
yeah, he's a wealth of knowledge anyway. We miss you, man.
Yeah.
We miss you for many reasons,
Yeah,
but also for your just like ability to come up with crazy stuff like that. I mean, just in general, the stuff that we'd pull together was great.
Yeah.
So good times. All right. Well, anyway, this is the end of this episode of the podcast. We appreciate you for joining us as always. Please let us know what you think. Rate us. Do all the fun stuff that you always do with podcasts. Helps us grow. It's a little thing on your part, but it means a lot to us, because we've been doing this for a while and then stopped for a long time, and now we're doing it again, and we want to make sure we build this right this time and get it to more people, because the more people we help, the better we feel about doing this, and then the more content we can create. Because ultimately, if we can do this full time, create campaigns and items and stuff for you guys all day, every day, that's so much more fun than going to work. Come on, guys. So
let that be work.
Help us help you.
Yeah.
Anyway, we appreciate you either way. Even if we just did this as a side project for the rest of our lives, I'd be fine with that.
It's fun either way. Yeah.
We're not looking for world fame. We just want you to be here and have fun. So anyway, thank you so much for joining us. And as we always say, may your rolls always be natural ones.
Just not natural ones.
We'll see you next time.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Okay.
Well, we'll see you guys later. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for joining.
And we'll see you next time. We don't know when we're doing our next live. We try to do it generally same time every week, but it's been so weird.
It's supposed to be Tuesdays every week,
but we've not
done a single Tuesday. It's always mostly Thursdays, and then we did today Wednesday. So
let's just say Wednesday or Thursday. If you don't see us Wednesday or Thursday live, then
something
we're not doing
happened.
it that week. But we're trying to get
We've got these backlogged, so the podcast will be released. You guys missed some, so if you want to go back and listen to those, they'll come out.
The last video, I'm sure those that have listened, wasn't good. This one was better. I understand if you didn't even listen to part of it. Audio is a big thing for me. If I don't hear something well, I'm just like I lose interest. So I get if you don't listen to that one. I glad if you listen to this one. But yeah, we're gonna try to increase quality. Production value is obviously important, but mostly it's the audio.
Yeah, well, these lives that we're doing, this is all about the audio, and we decided, hey, why not let YouTube join us once in a while?
And it's fun
So,
because I mean, then we
yeah.
get to talk to people we haven't talked to forever. So, and those that have been kind of hanging out on the sidelines can ask questions, and we can answer them live. And
Yeah,
whether we keep it in the podcast or not, I don't know.
likely not.
Probably not.
Because that's not really true to the format of a
No,
podcast. But
no. I mean, some of
Yeah.
the questions, answers we might put in, but it's going to be interesting to try to format that. So again,
Yeah.
most of it won't be in there. So
Yeah.
this
Yep.
is kind of just for you. So anyway, I'm going to turn that off now. But
Good plan.
yeah, we'll see you guys next
So long,
time.
folks.
Love you.